So in my last video, when I was comparing the Sony FX30 with the Sony A7C, which had the Sigma lens, which I'm filming right now, I'm filming it with this particular shot, I was really disappointed with the quality, and in particular, it was the sharpness. I think I know why I was really disappointed, at least with the sharpness. So I'm going to show you a brand new set of tests, and I'm going to use new lenses, so the Sony G15 f1.4, which is a prime lens, and I'll also be using the lenses on different bodies, so I'll take the APS-C lens and put it on the Sony A7C and put it in crop mode, and vice versa. And make sure you watch till the end of this video because I'll explain what happened in terms of the sharpness and what settings on my camera bodies I had misconfigured. So all the footage you've seen is shot in 8-bit 420 60 megabits, unless otherwise stated. This is the first test to do a baseline test. And basically what I'm trying to prove is that 100 megabits versus 60, 420 versus 422, 8-bit versus 10-bit, it doesn't really make a big difference in a talking A-roll headshot in a studio setting. Maybe if you have a lot of motion and you need those extra megabits, that bit rate, or you're doing color grading, then it really matters. But for the purpose of this test, if I want to save a lot of hard drive space, 60 megabits looks more or less the same as 100 megabits. But let me know if you disagree. Now here's an apples to apples comparison. We're using the FX30. We're going to compare the Tamron 11-20 versus the Sony G prime lens 15 f1.4. Both are at the 22mm focal equivalent of full frame, and both of them are wide open. So the Sony G is at f1.4, so there's going to be more bokeh in the background. It's going to be a little bit brighter. And yeah, this is a good baseline level test. And then we'll switch to f2.8 to give a more apples to apples comparison on the Sony G lens. But the issue with that is that when you step down on a prime lens, it's going to get even sharper. So versus a zoom lens, which is wide open or at f2.8, that's the best it can do. So it's going to be a little bit unfair. But let me know what you think in terms of the sharpness. Which one looks better? Now, in my opinion, they both kind of look very similar, but I would love for someone to disagree. The colors and everything look yeah, they look the same to me. So this is where the tests start going a little bit wrong. And don't get me wrong, not all the tests are wasted, but there's a setting here that I'm going to talk about a little bit later that really kind of makes this test disqualified. So on the right, you can see it's a lot sharper on the Sony A7C, the full frame. And then on the left, the FX30 looks very soft, which, you know, it could be a style that you're looking for. And yeah, so that kind of is a little spoiler into what my explanation is. But as you can see, I'm using the same lens, except obviously there's going to be a crop factor. So they're both at 36 millimeters. I had to put the Sigma at 24 millimeters on the 1.5 crop, so to make it equivalent. But yeah, you can tell that the A7C is more or less more sharp, and that could be its settings. Yeah, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Also, to get equivalence, on the left, on the FX30, it's at f2.8, and on the A7C, I had to stop it down to f4 to kind of make it equivalent, because 2.8 times 1.5 crop factor is roughly f4 on the full frame. And the full frame did zoom in to 36 millimeters. And on the FX30, which is a crop, it was at 24 millimeters. It wasn't zoomed in, but it had a crop factor, so it ended up being 36 millimeters. So we have APS-C FX30, A7C on the right, full frame. One Tamron versus the Sigma at 22-ish millimeters. And I'm finding that they're not too different. Obviously, the left side is going to be sharper because of the settings. And I need to prove that a little bit later in the third video series. But yeah, they both perform pretty well. Not bad. Okay, so we're going to stop down the Sigma lens to f4 to give it a more fair fight. Okay, so now the f4 is a lot sharper than the other side, than the Tamron at f2.8, which is wide open. I want to mention we're at 20 millimeters on the Tamron, or 30 millimeter focal equivalent on full frame, and now we're comparing it against the Sigma 24/7 at 30 millimeters as well. And yeah, I can't really say a real winner. Obviously, the right side is sharper because of the settings, but I don't know if they were the same. Who knows? Let's switch to 30 millimeter. So in this test, I took the Tamron and I put it both on the FX30 and the A7C, but I put the A7C on crop mode. And unfortunately, like I said before, the A7C is on a much sharper setting, so it's very hard to compare the two. But I don't know. I think aside from the exposure, they look more or less the same. Obviously, the A7C is a lot sharper. I do need to increase the Tamron sharpness in order to match it. And I thought I did. I'll explain why later in this video, so I'll keep repeating that. So we have on the left, the FX30 with the Tamron 11-20 at 22 millimeters, and then on the A7C in crop mode with the same lens at 22 millimeters as well. And
I think that the Tamron on the left side on the FX30 body looks better than the A7C in crop mode. It just looks a little bit nicer, even though the sharpness is obviously way lower. But yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know. So we're on the same body, the A7C. One's in crop mode on the left side, and one's in full frame. One's with a Sigma, and one's with a Tamron at 30 millimeters. And this is a more fair test. I would say the Sigma is looking a lot better, and that's of course because it's an art lens. So yeah, Tamron's not doing super well in this scenario. And maybe it's because it's in APS-C mode, so it uses less megapixels. So it could also be the sensor. So in my last video, when I was comparing the FX3 versus the A7C, I said that I was using no picture profiles, just this standard look. So ST and standard over there. And what I tried to do is try to match the settings between these two cameras. And that was a big mistake because these cameras were built maybe 3-4 years apart. So on the FX30, you can see that I set it to 0, the sharpness, but it's actually a scale from 0 to 9. There's no negative number. And that was the setting I shot with the entire time. Now, if you go to the Sony A7C, I am also at 0. And also note that there's less settings. There's only saturation, contrast, and sharpness, whereas on this one here, you have fade, shadows, highlights, and blah, blah, blah. So maybe it's a cinema camera, maybe it gets more types of options. So on the Sony A7C, I set it to 0, but lo and behold, look, it goes down to -5 or it goes up to +5. So I was basically in the middle the whole time. Then that would explain the sharpness. Like, I'm an idiot. If I was to compare them, apples to apples, I would have left it on the default. If I go back to default. So yeah, that was one major mistake. So basically all the tests, all the hard work I did was pretty much rendered useless. So yeah, this was a waste of time. So my overall opinion from the first video, I think still holds. The A7C plus the Sigma 2470 art lens still looks a lot better than the combination of the FX30 and the Tamron 11-20, despite the differences in the sharp setting. It has to do more with the dynamic range, which seems to be better on the full frame camera, and I have them both on DRO, Dynamic Range Optimizer Auto, so I don't know what gives with that, but yeah.
So yeah, in conclusion, you cannot trust any YouTuber. People make mistakes all the time, and this is a really big lesson. It's really, really difficult to match the settings of different cameras, especially cameras that have been built many years apart and they have different softwares and firmwares and whatnot. And this is why you should take everything with a grain of salt when you watch it on YouTube. This is personally for myself a big lesson, and I'm gonna have to redo all these tests. It took many, many hours to do all these tests. At least we got some value out of the test. We were able to do proper comparisons within the camera zone, like for example, using this lens on the Sony A7C, comparing it to its Sigma, because obviously it uses the same body. Now, so we did get some value out of the test. We were able to kind of make some interesting remarks, but I will have to do another set of tests between the Sony A7C and the FX30 again, except I'm going to have to try and match the settings with the sharpness. And that in itself is also a very difficult task. There's just so much different things that are happening here. Like this has, for example, the standard picture profile has clarity and highlights and like things that you can adjust that you can't do on the Sony A7C. So the color science is completely different between these cameras. And yeah, it's really hard to test. And I don't know how we can even scientifically test between different camera bodies and different lenses and stuff like that. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. All these videos where they compare all these cameras, I don't know if they're just scams or not. And like, at least I'm being honest with my mistake, and I acknowledge, there are some major flaws in the testing methodology. So it's not very easy, and I don't think you can actually give a comparison. So just enjoy the lens you got, the camera you got. Try not to compare it to other things, and try not to be, crazy like me. Anyways, if you like this video, please do give a like. It took many, many, many hours to build and to create. So it would be really, really appreciated. And if you have any questions or comments, let me know. I'll see you in the comment section.